Hello, you're tuned in to Paris Direct on France 24. I'm Carys Garland. Thanks for joining us. Here's a look at our top stories. French President Emmanuel Macron has touched down in the United Kingdom for a 3-day visit, the first state visit to the country by an EU leader since Brexit. Israel's defense minister has laid out plans to force all Palestinians in Gaza into a camp on the ruins of Rafah, in what human rights groups warn is part of an effort to expel the population. And over 1,000 firefighters are battling a blaze in the south of France that's burned 2,000 hectares and damaged several homes. Also coming up in business, 14 countries receive letters from Donald Trump with new tariffs set to come into effect on August 1st. We'll look at the cases of South Korea and Japan and why finding a deal could be complicated. French President Emmanuel Macron has touched down in the United Kingdom, kicking off the first state visit to the country by an EU leader since Brexit. The president and his wife Brigitte Macron will enjoy various displays of British pomp and pageantry, greeted at first by the Prince and Princess of Wales, but Macron will also address British Parliament and hold several meetings with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Macron posted to social media shortly after landing, saying the state visit was an important moment for our two countries and also a significant moment for our Europe, adding the bond is long-standing, forged by history and strengthened by trust. Well, discussions between Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are expected to focus on aid to war-torn Ukraine and bolstering defense spending, as well as irregular migration. For more on this story, we can bring in Andrew Smith, who's an expert on French politics and history at Queen Mary University. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24. First of all, can we read this visit as a statement that French-British relations are back on track after years of bad blood?
I think absolutely. This is a really important reset. This is a marker. Gone are the days of the turbulence of Boris Johnson. Of course, the upset and the crises around Brexit in 2020, the AUKUS submarine deals in 2021, and even the kind of, I think, rather ropey premiership of Liz Truss, when she tried to kind of throw some sort of doubt on whether or not France was actually an ally. I think this is very much a sense that this is a restatement of that historic commitment, those ideas of bilateral links. Of course, last year, it was the centenary, I should say, of the Entente Cordiale, that old agreement between Britain and France, that declaration of bilateral friendship. And that's really something that's important today. As you said, I think there are three key priorities which come around just now. Of course, the historic importance and that relationship around bilateralism, the increased importance of defence in the agenda, and likewise this idea of course, as we've seen in the news in recent weeks, the issue of immigration as well. So a really important moment, a reset, a restatement, a moment to renegotiate, I think, some very, very important bilateral agreements between Britain and France.
But are there not still challenges, though? I mean, on that issue of illegal migration, London has for years tried to push France to do more to stop those small boat crossings across the Channel, and we're expecting an announcement regarding agreements on this. But are we about to see a change in policy from the French?
I think, of course, it's been a really fraught issue. And of course, the number of crossings has gone up this year. We've seen a number of challenges. Of course, what we've seen as of February, where the initial agreement we had has been kind of pushed forward by another year, extended for another year, the kind of Sandhurst agreement. But of course, if you've been watching the British news over the last couple of weeks, you've seen real developments in that, changes in French policing priorities. Of course, there was very famous images of French police wading into the shallow water to deal with this new phenomenon of taxi boats moving along the coast and slashing boats in shallow water. That's a very different change in policing stepping into the water, changing that type of that type of approach. Now, there are real dangers within that. And of course, there are hopes on the British side that the French can be pushed towards greater intervention, perhaps up to 300 meters off the coast. There might be some type of interception or engagement. On the French side, they're looking to really kind of push that agreement, modeling it on the agreement between the EU and Turkey. That includes the UK providing funding, and Bruno Retailleau, the Interior Minister, is looking for a different kind of funding envelope coming from the UK to provide things from everything from binoculars to quad bikes to help police the border.
Andrew Smith, I'm just gonna stop you there if I can. We're getting live footage of the president being greeted by King Charles, along with his wife Camilla, Brigitte Macron, of course, also there. We're just going to take a look at those pictures now. We can see a few handshakes going on there. And Andrew Smith, I wanted to ask you, how much of this is the King Charles and Macron show? I mean, the pair are thought to have a warm relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. King Charles has mentioned in the past that his long-standing affection for France has really shaped his life. This is something I think where we'll see a real attempt to woo the French again. Of course, this is set against the promised state visit for Donald Trump, second state visit. Of course, Emmanuel Macron will be staying over, he's visiting Windsor Castle, there are banquets. This is about a recognition of historic bonds, and it becomes a really important part. It recognises the UK and France are, Europe's nuclear powers. They have a seat in the permanent seats in the Security Council, UN Security Council, and they'll be going and visiting and laying wreaths at statues of Winston Churchill and Charles de Gaulle. This recognises that historic entanglement around really important issues of defence. You can see Macron will be speaking in Parliament. He'll be throwing a state dinner. This is about recognising the bonds between the two countries. I think it's a really important ceremonial statement of that at the same time. But of course, there'll be other issues on the agenda. They'll be addressing, the coalition of the willing around the support for Ukraine, talking about how to manage Donald Trump. There's some differences there as well as, of course, this immigration issue we mentioned before. So there is ceremony, but I think there's a lot of business to be done alongside this at the same time.
And in recent months, Macron has pivoted more and more towards the world stage, kind of spearheading those efforts that you mentioned to end the war in Ukraine, for example, holding a phone call with Vladimir Putin for the first time in a long time. Do you see this trip sort of a desire to get away from domestic troubles for Macron, or is this sort of a reminder as what an alternative to Macron as president could be?
I think it certainly helps distract from the ongoing political crisis emerging around the government in France. François Bayrou's government, of course, since the failure of the conclave of pensions, we've seen the left kind of pull away, survived that vote there. But we're aware that it seems in some way that there is this sort of ticking clock on François Bayrou's time as Prime Minister. Perhaps we'll see Emmanuel Macron return to dissolve the Legislative Assembly. Perhaps sometime towards the end of the year, on the same type of timing we saw with the nomination of Michel Barnier as Prime Minister at that time. Maybe around October you could look for something like that. So yeah, really this helps. But Macron has leaned back into the reserved presidential duties around foreign policy, looking to lead on Ukraine, as we see, for example, the US pulling back on the supply of anti-air missiles because they're worried about their stockpiles. We see a restatement of that importance by the French and the British around supporting Ukrainian military needs. We'll see a kind of a restatement of those at Northwood, NATO Maritime Command at Northwood, around restating the importance of French and British leadership with Germany, with Poland to support.
Andrew Smith, we can just hear then the French national anthem being played for Macron and Brigitte at Windsor Castle. We're going to just take a listen. There we are, the military band playing the French national anthem there, as we just heard. Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron will, from Windsor Castle, go on to ride in a grand carriage procession for further engagements. Andrew Smith, just a last question. While we were getting into the weeds of French politics there, how much of this willingness, I suppose, to tackle illegal migration across the English Channel a bit further, how much of that has to do with the relatively new Interior Minister, Bruno Retailleau, who's known for taking a hard line on immigration?
Well, of course, you mentioned Bruno Retailleau, the Interior Minister. He's also, of course, the recently elected president of his party, Les Républicains, the centre-right party, pushing that very firm line on security, looking himself to the potential of a 2027 run at the presidency. So I think for Retailleau, it is a very important statement of priorities and trying to deliver on that. For Macron, this is an important image around bilateralism, around cooperation, around solving some of these enduring problems. And it represents, I think, a kind of grown-up response to something which has been a lingering issue since Britain's exit from the European Union. This is the kind of scrappy end of that. And these are the things I think that need to be addressed within this wider network of relationships between Britain and France. There are pressing, immediate political needs. There are longer-term, historic diplomatic needs. But this is very much a Franco-British story in the wake of this post-Brexit reset.
Indeed. Andrew Smith, thank you very much for your analysis. You're an expert on French politics and history at Queen Mary University. We're going to have to leave it there.